Welcome to today's session of City Scripts, which is a book discussion on Great Eastern Hotel with the author Ruchir Joshi, and he'll be in conversation with Rupleena Bose. Set against the backdrop of World War II, the novel unfolds within the opulent Great Eastern Hotel, where the lives of revolutionaries, artists, spies, and colonial officials collide. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Asha and I'm from the Word Lab. And City Scripts is our monthly curation of book talks, panel discussions, lectures, and more that bring the city alive. If you'd like to know more about what we do, please visit the links in our chat. For today's session, we'll be taking questions towards the end, so please write them in the Q&A box, and our speakers will answer them. I'm very happy to introduce our speakers today. We have Ruchir Joshi, who's the author of course, Great Eastern Hotel, and also The Last Jet Engine Laugh and of Paribartan, an Election Diary, a road book about the 2011 state elections in West Bengal. He's also the editor of Electric Feather, a collection of Indian erotic fiction. As a filmmaker, he has directed documentaries and essay films, including the award-winning 11 Miles, Memories of Milk City, and Tales from Planet Calcutta. Rupleena Bose works as an associate professor of English literature at Sri Venkateswara College, University of Delhi. Her acclaimed debut novel, Summer of Then, is set between cities and seasons, the personal and political, moving between a woman's interiority to the nation outside. Thank you both for joining us this evening. We're very delighted to be speaking about Great Eastern Hotel. And over to you, Rupleena, all yours.
Yeah, hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to City Scripts and welcome to this conversation about Great Eastern Hotel. And of course, like whoever has not read the novel, I would just say that you just have to like read it because Great Eastern Hotel is not just about the hotel. I mean, while I think the hotel is most of all metaphor here, while a lot of the story takes place in the hotel, it's much, much, much more than that. And most importantly, I think what it struck me, because you mentioned something about the city, city life, what it struck me is that it's this stupendous story which is bustling with energy, and you actually feel that you are on the street. And there are some scenes, and I won't disclose too much right at the beginning, but the fact is that how do you write a city, how do you write street life, which is a very difficult task for a writer, and maybe like it's something that you show and you see in cinema, but just in words, the energy, the fact, it starts with this energy of course Tagore's the death of Tagore, and this, the mob, which is the crowd which is rushing towards, and then it keeps going on. There are several important scenes which unfold on the street, and I think that is something which is so difficult to achieve. And I would start with asking Ruchir as to how, what did you, I mean, you almost feel you are there. You don't, almost is a wrong word. You are there. You're right at the center with Kedar or later on with Nirupama, particularly when the moment when there's that tear gas. You sort of, you're thronging the streets of Calcutta, and you don't know where you are, but you also know exactly where you are in terms of city landmarks, but it sort of completely dissociates yourself from the present reality of 2025, 2024, and takes you to the the years that the novel talks about. So how did you like write that? How did you achieve that, or was it conscious from the very beginning to capture the city in that way, that street in that way?
I'm glad you found it immersive because that was the idea. You start with imagining a scene, and I think one of the first things in the novel, as I'd planned it out, but it was a very rough graph that I thought of, was that I would start with Tagore's funeral. That was an important moment in, for my mind, for the novel, for Bengal's history, for the city's history, and during the war years, it was before the war actually comes to Calcutta in any real sense. There are two events. One is that Subhash Bose escapes, and in early 41, and the second thing that happens is that Tagore dies,
Hmm.
and then it almost feels like after that the war has the permission to begin. It's kind of weird. So I started with that first scene of, I mean, the novel is structured between like there are 3 or 4 days that I go into detail between 1941 and early 1943. And in between those days are the periods of months that take place in Calcutta at that time. And the third strand uh, is people looking back at that time from the 1960s and 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, but mostly from the 70s. So that's the strand.
73, I think, right? 73 is where it more or
Well, it
less the
starts
last.
looking at it from the beginning of the 70s, 74, uh, and from there till 79, which is the last mention, is
Last
Morit
one.
Chapi.
Uh-huh.
So it's there, and we don't touch the 1980s at all. So there are no computers, there's no DVDs, VHS, none of that. It's a continuation from 41, 30 years, 30, 40 years almost, is the period that the novel uh, is set in. So the first scene, I did my best to imagine it as vividly as I could from reports, listening to what people, I mean, reading what people had written about it, people's memories, etc. And then comes the second big scene, which you mentioned, which is after Gandhi declares quit India in August 1942. There are lots and lots of demonstrations and meetings, and one of them, 13th August, is the one I describe in one of the other days of the novel. And there's also uh, a great exodus from Calcutta in early 42 when the Japanese enter the war, and suddenly uh, the attacks are the Japanese are heading in one direction towards Singapore, the other direction north towards Burma. The Calcutta public panics and leaves Calcutta in droves.
Yeah.
And then when the Japanese don't come and the bombs don't fall, they all come back. And then they are there at the end of the year when the Japanese actually do bomb Calcutta. Then they
Right.
leave again. So
Yeah.
there's a double exodus that happens in history. So the first one is the one I described in some detail. So uh, yeah, the idea was it was a challenge for me to really imagine uh, all of the book, really, not just the big scenes, but also the minute details. How would people have spoken to each other? What would have been the texture of the house or the street or whatever they were, the tram they were in, and what would they have known? What would they have not have known? What kind of language would people have used? Even in English, I was very careful to avoid any slang that would have come after the war, really. And yeah, so the idea was to get the details right and to make it as vivid and totally pull the reader in as much as I could into that time. And it's
Yeah.
good to
And
see
also,
that sometimes. Yeah,
yeah, and also, like, you while you mentioned the Tagore scene, I was completely like taken over by that Quit India scene and how it begins, like a simple, like GC Laha to go and buy paints, or Neeru who's going to Bond and Shefford to buy that Kodak film. Like,
Imogen is, yeah.
yeah, the Imogen is going to buy that film, and these two, like, and so you mentioned the prominent landmarks. Anybody who's been to Calcutta knows which area you're going in, and then it's sort of the whole thing sort of like throngs them as to what happens. I think that I found that scene really remarkable, and to me it's like literally at the center. It comes, I think, pretty much at the center, maybe like midway point, maybe a little later in
About the midway point of the book.
about
Yeah,
the
I
midway
think.
point of the
Yeah.
novel. And I thought it was like it was remarkable the way that it sort of brings in all these multiple characters, and how they're, and you've seen them before in this on the street with Tagore, on Tagore's funeral on that day, and you again see them in this, like, again, like sort of literally like minor characters in this large movement of history, and which I guess is the larger perspective of the novel, which is looking at these ordinary people. And one of the characters, I don't want to say much, says that where is that story, which has Gopal, where is that story which has Neeru, where is that story? And it doesn't it these stories are simply not written, which is the other side, the underside of history. And obviously writing about the underside of history means that it's like it's tremendous research, right? And that's something I would imagine would have taken years for you.
It's an ongoing thing. And in fact, once you have the momentum of research, I'm still getting people coming up to me and saying, oh, by the way, is this in your novel? Or I read your book, but you left out this bit. And I'm like, I made the mistake of choosing one of the most eventful
Hmm.
uh, periods, which is a period which is full of the most turmoil, the most
Hmm.
radical changes that a city can undergo. I mean, speaking of cities, Calcutta is a city of 2.3 million people in 1939 when the war starts. And after all the upheavals, which is people coming into work in the ammunition factories, the soldiers from different countries coming in and laying camp in Calcutta, the fall of Burma leading to refugees from Burma coming into Calcutta. A lot of Bengalis who are working in Burma make their way back home, and other Indians come too. And then you have the huge wave of uh, Bengali peasants during the famine.
Hmm.
Then you get the partition refugees. So one after the other, these things hit. And at the same time, you've got the Goras, the Westerners who are also coming in. So white Russians have escaped and come from Shanghai. Jewish refugees are trying to make their way out from Calcutta and make their way to America and Australia from the port. So all these people are mingling and commingling and crisscrossing at this point in time. So that research was enormous, and I had to, in fact, obviously stop myself because it was like being in a sweet shop, and
It's
you're
never
tempted
ending.
and greedy as a
Yeah,
writer
yeah.
that, oh, this is very tempting. This is a great scene. This would be very kind of amazing to have in the book, and then you know that you can't have everything because it would be too much.
Hmm.
And so after the characters developed their own momentum, I let myself be dictated by what would happen to this character on this day, or how would they behave, what would they confront. And I left out a lot of stuff, which I had to in the research, which is fine. Uh, but yeah, the idea was to capture this period in the city's history where the city just completely does a shapeshift, you know.
Right, right. And also, I think what Ruchi, and for everybody who's listening, I would just like to say this: what Ruchi's novel, the Great Eastern Hotel, actually achieves is this. I think nobody has done it in recent times. Is this complete reworking of the language? Of how a novel, which is an Indian novel, which is set in Calcutta, or which is, it could be anywhere, but how it looks at language. You do not bother about italics. There is a line where you say that he was doing a Kamta Nach, and I remember thinking that I don't think you even translate that line. Sometimes, you translate in bits and pieces, like some things you again use in English, like you sort of very casually, conversationally, not even translate, but the line comes in Bengali and then it comes in English. So that is something which is remarkable. I mean, it is as if that, like that, this is what English is, this is what this language of this city or of this country, whichever language you use, is. And I think that is something which not many novels can even dare to, or novelists can even dare to do. There is also that bravery. I mean, you just like, you're audacious in terms of, like, the novel is audacious in the way it uses language. And I think that is, and every second sentence, it's like, it just takes in the colloquial in a way that I cannot remember. Indian writing in English, which is probably a dated term anyway, but contemporary Indian novel in English sort of tries to do, and it tries to do without any bones, without any fear, without any sort of reservations. And I think that's probably the most remarkable achievement of this novel. Like, for example, the use of colloquial. I just want to say that Kedar, whose cheddar, is something that I couldn't have imagined somebody mispronouncing. But you do that because it's also 1941, 1942. I mean, there is that much of limited an exposure towards Indian names. So I think that's something that if you'd like to speak on that, but even though anybody who would read the novel will just be like swamped into the universe also because of the language. So there's the street, and there's the second level, which is the colloquial, which is, I mean, each character has a different colloquial in a way, right?
So the first thing I'd like to say is that I've always felt uh, as an adult that English is as much an Indian language as Gujarati, Bengali, Tamil, Kannada, all these languages. English has been with us now in some shape or form for almost 600 years. It predates in certain level the Hindi that is forged in Fort William by an English officer sitting there making an amalgamation of all the different North Indian, you know, Braj and Awadhi and Maithili and all these languages to form a Hindi which is now spoken all over the country. Um, and increasingly, more and more people are now speaking English. So, for me to write English, an Indian reality in English, is a no-brainer. This is the language I speak, and yet I also speak Bangla, Gujarati, Hindi, understand a bit of Marathi and Punjabi. So, and I'm hardly a rare person. I mean, I know so many people who speak three or four languages among us,
Hmm.
and among people not necessarily who are intellectuals or writers, but just people doing other kinds of work. So, in my first novel, which came out in 2001, it's called The Last Jet Engine Laugh. I have Bangla, of course, then Gujarati, Hindi, and I was translating from these languages into English because I also felt uh, that the Bengali person or the Tamilian person may not understand the Gujarati, or the Gujarati person may not understand the Bangla, or the North Indian person will not get these languages. So I was translating for my first audience, which is an Indian audience.
Hmm.
Uh, But I did play more fast and loose with the translations in that book, where I'd explain in the next page or a paragraph later what a character had just said, and I'd just let the words sit there in Roman, in sort of transcribed in Roman before translating them. And there was a funny story when I went to Adelaide Writers Week. The woman who was introducing me for my talk loved the book, had really read it in detail and very meticulously. But she starts with a joke saying, Ruchir has written a great novel. I only wish she'd written it in English. And the entire audience burst into laughter. And that got me thinking. And we had a great discussion at that point. But then I went back to the hotel room and I opened the book and I checked how much of non English was actually there in a 374-page book. And when you totaled it up, it was about 4 pages. And I suddenly realized that writing in English, like
Hmm.
Indian spices or using a dark color amongst a lot of light colors, a little goes a long way. So that was my experience with the first book. This book, I think I decided to just keep the translations immediate. So if someone says something in Bangla, as soon as the speech quotes end, it's there in English. So once the reader gets used to it, the Bengali reader, like you or me, or who understands Bangla, would read it, read the translation, move on. Somebody who doesn't get the Bangla would read that, read the translation, get the meaning from it, and then move on to the next thing. And worked with that. And Rahul Soni, the editor, also felt that this was working best. So we stuck with it. And I think I'm glad to hear it works. Thank you. Um, yeah, Calcutta is a polyphonic, multilingual, uh, multi-ethnic city during the war, and you have not just one kind of Goras, but foreigners, Europeans, non-white people, from many different countries in the city at that point. You also have different kinds of Bengali people in the city. You also have Hindi speakers of different kinds in the city, especially Bihari workers, and Ustad, who's the gang leader, is very much a Bihari as well. So,
His colloquialism
um,
is slightly different. That's why
and the
Gopal,
colloquialism is slightly different, right?
Aurangzeb, yeah.
Exactly. So there's also a Frenchman. There's um, some German words used by the character called Eva, and so
Hmm.
on and so forth. So the point is to create a multi-voiced, multi-accented, multi-tonal city was a challenge, but I was always conscious that,
Hmm.
I mean, the great Bangla novels which depict that period have been written by Bengali authors at that time and soon after and even later. So I didn't need to go over that ground again. So, like, just as I don't describe the famine in detail or the partition bloodshed in detail, I allude to it. The book leads up to those moments and then looks back at those moments from uh, the 60s and 70s and the damage and the rupture that those things cause. But I wasn't trying to do a Bangla novel in English. I was very conscious of the fact that I was writing a novel which wasn't going to pretend that, oh, this is a Bengali novel, but in English. It's not. This is a novel which also looks at all the other kind of people who were there visiting from Europe and abroad in Calcutta who haven't been written about. The whole thing about jazz and the whole thing about the political decisions being made back in the back rooms. All these things have not been depicted as far as I know. So that was a challenge. And at the same time, it's very much embedded in the reality that the normal person on the street goes through. So there was that double challenge for me to face when I was writing it.
Yeah. In fact, in terms of the colloquial use of the colloquial, I don't know if I may say, it actually reminded me of Melville, Moby Dick, or even Mark Twain, the way they use the language. I think it's very close. I mean, not I
Ah,
won't say it's close, but I think that is a good example to give. They are using English as well, but it's the dialect, or even later Invisible Man. Not so much Toni Morrison, I would say, but in parts, yes, but much more in this Mark Twain and Moby Dick kind of a way, where colloquial is a part of the. I mean, it's English, but it's really not English. So here's in Bengali, it's English, and what language is it? It's the language of what you speak, the language of the street, and language of the characters. So I have to say that it also flows very easily. Or maybe because maybe I'm also conversant in Bangla, so it's never there's never an interruption or an aberration. It just moves very, very smoothly, the way you move from multiple colloquials, particularly class colloquial, into like the American colloquial, because American commanders, so the soldiers are also like using their colloquials at several points, with the Bengali colloquial. So I think that is something which is brilliant, and it's a study in itself about how language can be used in the novel form to describe, to sort of give a sense of the multitude of the city, as you just said. And while you say that the famine is not really referred to, I actually found a lot of it in the way you use food in the beginning, and then famine comes in the in much later. So that juxtaposition, that the excess of food, particularly with the chef Bon Mason, how do I pronounce it?
Bon Maison.
Bon
Bon
Maison.
Maison. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
particularly with Bon Maison and everything that is being, like they're consuming. And I remember this scene that you have where Nirupama is having those cucumber sandwiches for the first time at Florey's, and she's commenting as to she's never had cucumbers cut, in circles.
And in bread. Yeah.
Yeah, in bread. I think that it's a beautiful moment, I have to say, and it's one of those really remarkable moments of somebody having a, and then she's struggling to have a club sandwich at some point later. I
A bit later. Yeah. Yeah.
bit
Yeah.
later. So I think so that moment. So there is a lot of food, and then there's famine, which it's sort of, can we say, that it changes Kedar. For people who have not read, Kedar is a very important character who essentially is a painter, but it's not just that. A lot of him is also about is retrieved through memory, through through other characters as well who try to remember him at one point. And it's also about the way he changes with the city, the grief, in a way the famine and the grief of the city sort of starts changing him. He becomes, to me, he becomes different, particularly in his art, expressed in his art towards the later half than when we see him first with Tagore or with Rasco, and which is who's his man Friday, who's also an interesting character, which I'll come back to actually. So
So Kedar, he starts off wanting to be a realist impressionist. His inspirations are the impressionists and the great masters of the Renaissance, etc. Plus the Indian Shantiniketan painters. And he has no time for cubism and abstract modern art and all this stuff. And as he develops, there are people like the number of Bengali artists who actually depict the famine and actually draw very moving
mm,
uh, drawings and paintings of the famine. Chitta Prasad, Zainul
yeah,
Abidin,
you
Shomnath,
mentioned
or
it.
others.
Yeah.
Kedar tries to also grasp his immediate reality, but he fails. He can't do it. And later on, as he grows older, he looks back at the time and comes across and invents a different kind of language in which to depict what he has seen and experienced. So that is part of the story of the book, is the challenge to creativity, that as an artist, can you immediately process what's going on around you and turn it into and express your art, express that to your art? Sometimes yes, sometimes not. And sometimes it takes for a while for a reporter or a journalist or a documentarian, the reporting is immediate. But for a painter or a writer or a poet or somebody doing theater or something, it may take a few years to process something and be able to talk about that time uh, in a different way so that it makes sense to the people who are receiving their art at that time. So that was another challenge for me to think about that. Um, yeah, so that is Kedar's challenge in the book at one level, I would say, but it also gave me the opportunity to create these imaginary paintings, these visual worlds for
Absolutely.
the reader to get into,
Yeah.
to challenge them to, okay, move out of a straight narrative of a scene and look at how a painting would abstract that narrative,
Mm.
or look at a painting which is a narrative painting of a time and then listen to the actual story that triggers that painting and see the difference between the two.
Yeah, yeah.
That
And
was always
yeah.
something I was grappling with while writing the book.
And is it, I mean, going just like for a minute again, spending a minute on Kedar before I move on to, the art world that you sort of fleetingly refer to, which is that, is it the longing for the city when he's away for a, brief period? Is that what makes him create those, iconic pieces of art where he actually uses cubism? Is it that because he's
He
away
doesn't
from
actually
the
use cubism really. He uses the narrative uh, vernacular. He does one or two spoofs of cubism, but other than that, he doesn't really do cubism. He's away from his city, and he's away from that time, and he's looking back at that time. And he's fantasized about different landscapes that he wants to paint when he's a young man.
Yeah, yeah.
And as life uh, plays its tricks, he finds himself brought into one of those landscapes that he's fantasized about painting for a long
Absolutely.
time. And
Mm.
when he gets there, he finds it. He doesn't feel like painting
Yeah,
the
yeah,
landscape. Sitting in that landscape, he's remembering, in that rural landscape, very beautiful landscape, he's remembering a very grim and urban reality of the time from the city that he's left behind. So it's that dissonance also
yeah,
that,
yeah.
that he's sitting in one place but doing something about something completely different, all based on his memory and his experiences.
Yeah, it's memory of that bustling place, not that moment, because that moment
Yeah,
which
and the
has
brutality of those times.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, so I mean, it's not that I don't talk about the famine. It's just that I decide to talk about the famine. Uh, I mean, one of my inspirations was Kumar Gandhar. Kumarji apparently once said ki a lot of people, a lot of singers, when they sing a rag, they sing the full face of the rag, but he's always looking for the profile of the rag,
yeah.
to find something from the side. So my attempt was to find the profile of that time, which
Absolutely,
has
yeah.
been much written about and much documented.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, when it comes and goes, particularly, in fact, even in the character of Rasco, which is a very who I really liked, and I was missing him at one point, and then of course we go back to him, and I think he's quite a brilliant character, actually. I don't know who's
I'm
your
very fond of Rasco. Yeah,
yeah,
Rasco is Kedar's band Friday. He's like
yeah,
the main servant in this big sprawling uh, Jomindar's house on Palm Avenue, which is actually a very wealthy lawyer's house who have estates in the countryside. And Rasco, uh, as happens in these houses, you have two or three servants. So one servant becomes the favorite of a couple of the family characters, and other servants handle other family characters, and they handle it between them. And there are these dynamics. So he's the one who's closest to Kedar,
yeah.
and then that relationship develops, and then of course you get Rasco at the end of the book in a very different context, which we won't reveal now. But
Yes,
again, it has to do with food and scarcity of food,
and also his
uh,
paintings.
and also the paintings. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
And going back to the paintings, I think so. There is a moment, and again, without revealing much, because it's no fun if you just have. I think which I'll tell everybody that you just have to experience the novel. It's an experiential novel. It's also, I would say, it's a very filmmaker's perspective as well, a writer slash filmmaker, which I know Ruchir is. He gets in Lalon songs, which I know that he's known. I mean, he's worked on bowls for several years, and which is again, which is beautiful, the way it comes into the novel form, the way you sort of put in all of these sort of very small sort of threads and make this whole entire patchwork blanket, I would
Mm.
say, multicolored, which is that the art scene, what you talk about, the Bombay progressives. There's a small moment, but there's a time when basically Kedar goes to Bombay, and it's almost like, you're sort of sidestepping from this whole Bombay art scene, and through his perspective, you sort of see the other artists, the mainstream artists. Did you think of spending more time there?
In the book, no, because that becomes a totally different book about
It
those
does
artists
become
and
a
what,
right.
and
Yeah,
if one was to look at them with sympathy and with detail, I mean, Rushdie has. I mean, if you look at The Mourns Last Sigh, he describes some of that scene in that novel, not in a very satisfying way to my mind. Some bits are okay. Um, but for
but it's
me, it
also
was more about the rivalry between Calcutta and Bombay that is developed
correct.
at
Yeah,
this point.
yeah, yeah. That's
There's a kind of
exactly.
love-hate,
Yeah,
frenemy kind of relationship, which Calcutta doesn't have that with Delhi or Madras, and Bombay doesn't have that with Delhi or Madras. It's this east-west kind
yeah,
of two major bruiser cities
yeah,
slugging it out for the chief cosmopolitan urban center of the country.
yeah,
And Calcutta begins to lose after the war, and Bombay begins to win big time.
yeah,
And one of the first indicators of that is the forming of this progressive group, which is in opposition to certain kind of academic painting, but is also in opposition to the kind of work that's going on in Bengal, that has come out of Shantiniketan, etc. While there's respect, there's also an acknowledgement that we need to move on.
right, right. And
But
that's
where
there
they
in the book, where Bangali
and
artist is constantly referred to.
and so for a young Bengali artist to go and meet these people who are slightly older or roughly the same age as him, they are friendly with him, but he also sees their work and finds most of their work not to his taste because he
Hmm.
feels it's too indebted to Picasso and Braque and few other European modernists, and that doesn't make sense to him either because he's like, if you're going to emulate the Impressionists, but why emulate anyone? You're
Hmm.
breaking boundaries, you're breaking into new ground, break new ground. So I imagine Kedar as this painter who doesn't actually exist in history
Hmm.
as a narrative painter
Hmm.
who comes A from Bengal and B in the 1950s and 60s. So he comes before the great narrative painters whose work we love and respect today, like Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh or Bhupen Kakkar or Sudhir Patwardhan or Nilima Sheikh or even Nalini Malani's earlier work. All these people, G. Patel, etc., who move away from the abstractions and the distortions of the Bombay progressives, and they are the next generation who are much more, quote unquote, realist or based, looking at life around them on the streets for their inspiration and rendering those characters, those streets, those gullies, etc. But all that stuff starts coming into focus in the late 60s, 70s, and then the early 80s, and comes out of Baroda, a lot of it, and Bombay again, and some of it from Delhi. But uh, Kedar is before that time, and he's an outlier. So he's not liked, or he doesn't like the Bengali painters in Calcutta. He doesn't like the Bombay progressives, and they don't have much time for him. Uh, the art establishment, which is reviewing and revering the new art coming out of India, like a magazine like Marg, will appreciate, a filmmaker like Satyajit Ray, or will appreciate a dancer like, Mrinalini Sarabhai or Uday Shankar and all these people. They will look at Hussein, they will look at all these modernists, but Kedar for them is somebody they don't understand because he's on the one hand realist, on the other hand, he's breaking a lot of boundaries that they don't understand are even being broken. So he's ignored, right?
Hmm.
Till
Yeah,
later on the
it is.
book,
Yeah.
we realize, okay,
Think-
there's a
yeah.
great value
Yeah, there's
to
great
this
value.
work.
Which is also
But
like something which you do with artists, right? It's only later when the sort of, which is a very
sometimes people get kudos and accolades immediately and they can revel in them. Like, I mean, Hussein
mm,
lived a very successful life full of success and accolades and all this till the end.
right.
There are other examples, the writers who are feted all over the world, celebrated all over the world, and the other writers who are only recognized and discovered long after they're gone or late in life or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a separate long conversation. The other thing, of course, is music.
Filmmakers too, by the way. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, the other thing that of course is the point of view, because you use the point of view very often, and like very often in the sense not just the point of view of a person, but the very cinematic, the very sort of there's a camera moving all through it. It feels to me, at least. Was that intentional? I mean, you start with that reverse image, which is stupendous, by the way, which is astounding, I think, what you
Thank
begin
you.
with. So people, whoever has the novel, just like you can just read the first three lines and then see that.
Um, I don't know if it was deliberate, but I was imagining a scene, and I suppose while describing it, uh, one of the things that had to be brought home to my mind was the visual quality of what you would have seen on the street, or what you would have seen from inside the crowd, what you would see looking out of a window, and even what you would see from a low-flying surveillance aircraft if you were to
Yeah,
look
that you
down.
mentioned. Yeah.
So, I mean, that is a drone shot before a drone shot, right? Or an
Right.
aerial shot
And also
before
the
such thing.
smoke, that smoky sense of the
The
city,
sprawl of the
the
city,
sprawl, the
and the
sprawl.
different patterns of the
Yeah.
streets and the avenues and what's going on, and the smallness of the dots of the crowd. But I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but I that's how it um, ended up on the page, and I thought it worked. So that's what I went with.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the conscious cinematic decisions are more uh, in the transitions between the individual scenes that I did. I was always looking at an end of a scene and the start of the next scene as a cut point, in point, out point. I found myself looking like, is that a good transition there? What happens? This character finishes this character starting something else. And it's not a visual match cut like you would have in a film, but it's more like a story match cut or a story contrast cut. At least that's
Right.
what I was thinking of.
And even the subheadings that you use are very interesting. You have so many of those, like each one is like a like a whole sort of, I don't know, book title in itself, I think, or a song title, I would say, in itself, the
Yeah,
multiple.
sometimes it's there to wrong foot the reader. Sometimes there to invite the reader in. Sometimes the reader can look at a chapter title or a section title from earlier in the book, and it
Hmm,
makes a different kind of sense once you've read a bit more of the book. If you go back and forth,
hmm,
all those things. Yeah, yeah. And the book basically comprises of 116 sections, and the longest of which is, I think, maybe 15,000 words, which is by itself not a particularly long chunk as
hmm.
novels go.
Right,
But
right.
the
Which
rest
one
of
is
it is
that?
all,
Yes, do you remember?
I think, maybe Howrah, I think.
Because it's a, yeah, the Havra is a
That
very, very
whole,
interesting
that
sequence.
description.
Yeah.
That would be the longest, I think,
Right.
single chunk, if you
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
otherwise they're cuts. I mean, it's the
They're
same
cuts.
scene. You're looking at Tagore's funeral, but you're looking at it from the point of view of four different characters.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it in two sections. So once and then twice. And then, anyway, that's
Yeah.
getting into the nitty-gritty of the book, which we shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, the other thing is of the female characters, which I'm while I don't want to separate it like that, but it's very interesting that the actual revolutionaries are, most of them, they are women in this book, right? Be it Kea, be it Nirupama, primary characters, and their story takes, I don't know, I mean, their story sort of holds the whole, I mean, you begin with them, and you broadly sort of also end with them, I would say. And did you have a conscious choice about using these two or these women, because they're, mostly about men most of the time when you're talking about, people who are going to be a part of the Tebhaga movement or the Naxal movement, but you actually use, or going to the villages for, to what, but here you have these two vital women. There are of course more than two very important women, but I'm talking about these two characters. One is Kea and one is um Nirupama,
Nirupama.
of course. Nirupama, of course,
Yeah. So the first thing is, I was
figure.
very interested in the fact that uh, what the nationalist movement and the communist movement and the 20th century throws up in the first decades of the 20th century is that there is a strong uh, wave of women, especially urban women, from different classes coming forward and entering professions and activities that were previously reserved for men. And this happens across different political convictions. So the Gandhian movement, I know, really helps, provides a kind of fillip for women's movements or women's activity, education, participation in politics in Maharashtra, Gujarat, a little bit in the South, but also in Bengal. The communist movement also involves women in a way other political movements are slow to do. You do not find women participating that much in, say, the Hindutva, RSS, Hindu Mahasabha groupings, or the Muslim League, uh, those groupings where where the religion-based parties are pushing forward. They are very, very male parties, most of them. But the Congress, the communists, the Subhash Bose's forward bloc, these are definitely parties which encourage the participation of women and are conscious of the fact that women are a constituency and are not just a constituency, but should be active and have agency in the party up to a point. So what does happen and what is actually real is one of the things I describe in the book, which actually I depict in the book, is that three women from different political backgrounds, but who were school friends. In this case, say Nirupama, Roma, and Titir. They form they rent a flat and form a like housing collective in a small way. These kind of collectives were actually formed by women in Calcutta and South Calcutta, Dover Road, Gold Park, other areas. There were five, six of them at that point. And the women were from different party backgrounds, but they were friends. And in those days, they could be friends yet differ politically. Today that would
Right.
be very hard to
Yeah.
imagine a CPM, TMC, and BJP Congress person all living in the same flat. I don't think we could have that, right?
Right.
But in
Right.
those days, Nirupama, who is a communist cadre or communist volunteer, Roma, who is in the socialist wing of the Congress party, and Titir, who oscillates between the Hindu Mahasabha and the
Yeah.
more Hindu wing of the Congress party, they're all together at school and they love each other and they are together in this house. And then, of course, Kea and other characters come in later. Uh, so uh, that is one thing. And the whole business of what happens in Calcutta is when all these foreign soldiers come in, they are they become a threat in many ways to the women in the city, and women do feel very, very. They're assaulted, they're raped, they're catcalled, they're hassled by soldiers from a lot of the backgrounds. The
There's a
Tommies less, the
there's a
British Tommies less, but
yeah.
the Americans, both black and white, the other soldiers who are here from other countries. Uh, there's a real sense of menace here in the city. And what that leads to is formation of MARS, the Mohila Atmaraksha Samiti,
Right.
which
Right.
is Indian women and European women getting together and petitioning the governor and petitioning the commanders, the general commanders, that we need to make sure that these men are kept under control. And from that MARS movement, the communist women who joined that, or the activist women who joined that, move seamlessly into famine relief. And from famine relief, you move, it's a natural progression then into helping the peasants fight for their rights and for the, one-third share of the sharecropping rice, which is what the
Absolutely.
Tebaga movement essentially
Yeah. Right.
is.
Right.
And that kind of transcends, that's mostly a Communist Party thing, that the Tebaga movement, but uh, it's something that goes beyond partition. So it's continuing in East Pakistan and in West Bengal till the point where the former Bengal police in East Pakistan cracks down brutally
Yeah.
on the women volunteers and women activists and tribals in East Pakistan, and some of them are forced across the border into West
Right.
Bengal, which is also cracking down, but not quite as brutally. And this again is a precursor to the Naxalite movement.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so there's a whole graph of hungry
Continuation of.
protest, activism of different kinds, violent and non-violent, depicted in the book. And again, these stories have been told by the women who've written autobiographies. My friend Kavita Punjabi has done a whole PhD thesis and a wonderful book about their memories and the Tevaga movement, etc. So I relied on these accounts and stuff to build this part of the story, which was again, to my mind, worth telling in this novel and in this context.
Absolutely.
Important, not just worth telling, crucially important. I mean, that is
Yeah,
actually
it sort of
probably the
makes
main spine
sense.
of the
Yeah,
book, and then the others are
yeah.
attached to that spine,
Yeah,
really,
I
for
realized
me.
that we haven't spoken about Great Eastern Hotel because that's what it's called. But to me, it's much more than that. The hotel is there, but hotel is also like much a metaphor. But I just want to add that I also thought that while you talk about historical events and how that is informing, I mean, like Kavita Punjabi's narrative, or I also thought that chaos narrative, like the journey was very very interesting. I sort of did not expect her journey to be what it becomes, and I will not say
Yes,
more
but we
than,
should probably not say more than that.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
won't
mean,
say more than that, but it's a
like, well, she's an upper class, very
yeah,
wealthy
she's a
uh,
brilliant character.
young woman
Yeah,
who is active in politics, and
not just
then that
politically, also
activism takes her into different directions. Yeah,
not just activism, also I would say there are certain very unconventional things that she says even in her interactions with Kedar, at
sure.
very
Yeah,
sure. And I thought
yeah,
that was like very very interesting. I mean, like the way in which you build her, and eventually, the way we see her emerge in the novel, which is again very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
And yeah, and coming to that, of course, like of course the role of music, because it's like anyway the whole novel is like this grand orchestra which you're sort of conducting and putting everybody sort of together in this space, almost like a large screen where everyone is coming together. And music of course plays an important role in the novel, particularly the jazz era. And Fenton is a very interesting character which I like. If you'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was talking about this the other day with Sandeep in my conversation with him, that music as a structuring principle figured in my head from very early on in the book, that classical music, Indian Khayal and Drupad were important in the sense I really wanted to uh, explore this era in Vistar, so do a full rag. So start with a slow alap, move to a madhyalay, and then to a faster
Hmm.
crescendo towards the end, faster climax towards the end. So that was one kind of structural principle that was at the back of my head while I was writing the book. And then when I was in a residency in Basel in 2013, I had a sort of life-changing moment where uh, there was a composer called Julius Eastman, who was a African American modernist composer, so not a jazz person, not into rock and roll or any of the pop things, but more working in the contemporary classical idiom. And he was widely, like, again, disregarded, ignored, revered by those people who knew his work, but also with a bad drug habit, often on the streets. And he dies very young in the Lower East Side in New York by 1980. I think he's maybe 40 or 45 when he dies, in an obscure and sad death, but leaving behind these scores of this great work, which has hardly been performed in his lifetime. But when it's been performed, people have gone crazy about it. And some of these scores were retrieved and put together. And there was one performance for four grand pianos
Mhm.
in the Basel Kunsthalle, which they performed, Julia. And I did not know Eastman's work at all. And so the entire thing is there are three pieces written for four grand pianos. There's no other instruments.
Mhm.
But and he was black and gay, Julius Eastman. So the first uh, piece is called Evil Nigger. The second piece is called Crazy Nigger, and the third piece is called Gay Guerrilla. And they played these three pieces, and they take about 2 hours or 1.5 hours to render. But I was absolutely shaken to the core of my being, listening to these four pianos interplay with each other and create these rhythms and these echoes and dialogue and all this stuff. And I thought these four characters or five characters I'm dealing with, my ambition, my attempt, and my fantasy, if you like, but my ambition was to create each of these characters as equal, give them equal weight,
Mhm.
and play off against each other like these four pianos. So that
Right.
was something that was in my head at a deeper level of structure. So when
Hmm.
people say, did one character become more important than another? Did one character run away with any? They tried to. But for me, Gopal, Kedar Lahiri, Nirupama Mojumdar, and Imogen Snell are all, in a sense,
Hmm.
equally important characters. They may not appear in exactly, they may not have the same amount of footage in film terms or the same amount of wordage. But
Hmm.
in terms of weight and balance, I was always thinking, and of course, there's the fifth character who we will leave out without mentioning.
Yeah, I did a good job of not mentioning.
Yes, and I'm not going to mention either. So that's the narrator cat. So these five characters in a sense, then, but actually the four characters from that time. So and then music again plays a very important role at many different levels. For example, the Tagore song "Akla Cholore" runs
Hmm.
as a kind of repeated coda through the book and coming in different contexts, sung by different people
Yeah.
at different times.
There are many
Uh,
songs in the book. There are many
there
songs.
is also Nazrul,
Go through.
Kalome
There's
Paye
Lalong,
Tolai,
that
which
lovely
is a paean to Kali. Huh?
that
Uh,
Lalong song also towards the end.
The Lalun song is there, which is again, okay, I made a film on the Bowls many years ago, and that was one of the main great songs from that film, written by Lalun, so that comes in at the end. Then jazz, of course, is important, blues is important, rock and roll is important.
Yeah,
So
Calcutta Blues you mentioned. Yeah.
yeah, so for me, uh, and the way different people do. I mean, the whole prologue is set around the idea of has music as a central theme in a
Yeah.
sense when people read it,
Yeah.
and then there's the Tagore songs. There's a Rabindra Shongit that's there,
Mm.
loved by some, hated by others, etc.
Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah, music. There's a graph of music through the whole book. Again, not very conscious, but it came like that. So when I was reading it before finishing the book, I saw, okay, there is a graph, and I can see how it works across the book. There's a graph of food, and there's a graph of paintings and photographs and visual stuff. All these are strands that and architecture. So these are
I
the
know.
things that
Yeah.
so
Mm.
these are the things that are interwoven, but they weren't very schematically done. It wasn't like I made a decision beforehand that I'm going to do this and this is how it's going to work. I had a basic idea of a storyline and the things that I was interested in, the things my characters were interested in, and
Mm.
from that, this thing grew, and it
Yeah.
took time to write, partly because of this as well.
Right, because it's just like it's enormous in a way what you set out to achieve, and you sort of also, because how else do you tell the story of Calcutta in a way? I mean, to me the food strand is also like, the wine in the hotel, and the hotel itself, what it's sort of the exuberance, the excess that it's sort of symbolizing, as opposed to what is happening in the city elsewhere. And also there's this whole Christmas Eve party, the chef handing out, the kind, this whole like the whole post, the colonial remnant of colonial, the British culture of the club, of the food. I think that is something which is brilliantly done, and which sort of takes you right at the center of that moment, I think. So that is like the Christmas Eve parties, particularly, in a way, I think, sort of like really transports you very beautifully there. And then towards the end, suddenly, that you feel as if, you feel guilty of that excess of when you hear Rasco's, when you go later towards the famine.
When you
And
come across a simple meal, or there's
yeah,
two, three times in the book where you get a very simple Bengali meal, which
yeah,
is non-fancy
yeah,
and like a daily thing that someone would eat. And again, uh, I was very careful because I didn't want to go into a whole kind of detailed unfurling of all the great Bengali dishes that I could have talked about, all the vegetarian dishes, all the non-vegetarian, the fish, the meat, because
no,
it's a
I
great
just,
cuisine, as we know. But this book was not the place to make a catalog of that cuisine,
yeah, but I
or
was very
indeed
happy
of
with the chicken patties.
Anglo-Indian cuisine or something, huh?
I was very happy with the chicken patties and
Yeah.
everything, the lamb chops with
There's
one.
also a smell of go along the chicken on the ferry at the end. So,
Yeah, yeah. And
so
that Bon Mason cooks the when he says that.
the cold chicken, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and the
the
consomme also, yeah.
yeah. So I think that's
So
something which is amazing. And we are at 7:25. Wait, and people, please ask questions, because yeah, I mean, I'm sure people will have questions about I would imagine how to write a city, because that's one of the things which, because it's city, like IIHS talks about the city, and their work is around the city, and that's something that is the city is so vast. It's like a megalopolis is impossible to put together, which you do. And if somebody were to,
So,
like, yeah, build a map of
the-
1943, they would use your novel, I think.
so just one quick point. The book is called Great Eastern Hotel and not The Great Eastern Hotel, because I always knew the hotel itself would play a central role in getting the characters, where different kinds of people would be in the rooms, crisscrossing each other, encountering each other, and the hotel's character would change across the war as
Mm,
well. But as I was writing, very quickly I realized that actually Calcutta itself was the Great Eastern Hotel,
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
where so many people came, lived next to each other,
Uh,
not knowing each other. Some people came for short periods, some people came for longer periods, some
yeah,
people checked in but could never check out. Some
yeah,
people never fully checked in, just
yeah,
passed through,
yeah,
exactly like in a hotel. So
yeah.
that's why the book is called Great Eastern Hotel, which is, of course, about the hotel, but it's also, in a way, about the city, which is a Great Eastern Hotel,
And time and history of that, of the city,
and the time and history of
which
that of
yeah, which
of
is,
that.
you only have the novel to actually go there, I guess, to
Yeah,
access that, I
yeah.
would imagine. So we are at 7:27. Should we have? Can we have some questions? Ask anything. Ask away, people.
Uh, the questions are in the Q&A box, Rupleena. Should I just
I.
read them
But
out?
where is it? Please, I can see the Q&A box.
I've got webinar chat here.
How long
Okay.
did
Oh,
oh, got
Q&A.
it.
Okay, here's the
Okay.
Q&A
How
box.
long did it take you to write the book? Where did the idea of the novel start for you? In the sense, was it Tagore's death? Did the hotel come to you first? Was it one of the characters?
Okay, anonymous attendee. Okay, so basically, it took me almost 20 years to write the book. I cannot tell a lie. I started off with the idea that I would perhaps be doing uh, a trilogy even that trilogy was envisaged as being shorter than what the whole novel is now. But I wasn't consciously trying to do a trilogy. I thought if it gets bigger than this, maybe we could think of two novels, twin novels, or three novels, something. But as the story got, as I started writing the story more and more, it was getting increasingly difficult to find a place to chop the book into two. And because if you're going to have a trilogy or a suite, as they call it, two books, or a quartet, then
Hmm.
each book has to be self-sufficient as a narrative arc in itself.
You're right.
And this did not happen in this book. It, like, just as a narrative arc seems to be concluding, something else starts up, and then you have to continue with that. So there was no good place to cut the book either into two or three or four or anything. And then finally, when the editor looked at it, Rahul Soni and earlier editors as well, it was like, this is just a big book, and I think it's
Yeah.
working. Let's go with it. So
Yeah.
that's the first part of it. The second thing in the question was, uh,
Did
where
the
did the
hotel
idea
come
of
to
the
you
novel
first?
start for you? Right. The idea of the novel began for me with my dad, who was a Gujarati writer who was in Calcutta as a young man during the war. And he'd tell me stories of the war and what it felt like. He also has a novel in which it's an autobiographical novel about a young man like himself who actually goes to Tagore's funeral, attends it, and goes all the way and stays with the funeral pyre through the night. It's a very different description from my description. Uh, but I knew that I found that whole idea of the Tagore funeral uh, very, very interesting as one place to start. And the
Hmm.
hotel would come into it at some point soon. I knew that as well. I also knew that, say, someone like Satyajit Ray had attended the funeral and had his pocket picked. So
Hmm.
one of the
Yeah.
characters has his pocket picked in the book. And I imagined different characters, and I imagine the first time we come across them is when they're dealing with the spectacle and the shock of being part of this massive crowd. So
Hmm.
there's Kedar, there's Gopal, who's there to pick pockets, and there's
Giri.
Imogen, who's a English woman who's just come to see what's going on. How can a poet dying stop a whole city? What she goes to see. And there's Nirupama, who obviously reveres Tagore, like as does Kedar, and she and a friend are there to watch the procession and to pay their respects. So these four characters we are introduced right there. So the hotel and the funeral both came together as triggers for the book, really. And then the thing grew from there.
Yeah. Pooja Sagar is saying that are there more other novels from India which look at art history as central to its plot?
Are there other novels? Yeah, Pooja Sagar. Are there other novels from India which look at art history central? I think so. I think Anuradha Roy has written a book
Mhm.
which has got, again, mid 20th century, early 20th century art. Someone is part of it. Mourns Last Sigh by Salman Rushdie has art in it. Central, the Bombay character, the Bombay progressives, and other
Mhm.
characters like Bhupen Khakkar and all who come afterwards are all part of Rushdie's book. I'm trying to think of it. Are there any other
Jeet's book also has,
examples? Can
right?
you?
Jeet's book
Which one?
also has the Bombay one, the second
Jeet, of course, has the book of
book to
yeah. Jeet's
Chocolate
book has
Saints.
a
Uh,
book of chocolate saints, or is it the other one? It is the book of chocolate saints
Book of Chocolate Saints. Yeah,
about
Bombay.
Sousa.
Yeah, yeah, the
It's
Sousa.
about Sousa, of course. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
It's about F. N. Sousa. Then, I mean, these are the ones I can think of right away. These are English ones. There might be more in Bengali or Marathi or South Indian languages. I don't know.
Yeah. Um, it's saying that would you write a future? He has already written one. Ruchir, you can answer that. The Last Detent in Love. Hi, Ruchir. Thank you for this fascinating talk. You have looked to the past. Into the past, would you write a futuristic sci-fi novel set in Calcutta? And this also, I think, this matches with your reverse first line, right? You go reverse.
Yeah, I have. My first book is called The Last Jet Engine Laugh. Uh, I don't have a copy. Just excuse me. I'll beg your pardon. I'll just find a copy of it. Um,
Why don't you? What do you mean you don't have a copy? You must be
no,
having
I
it.
do. I do. The copies are lying in the other room. So this is the Great Eastern Hotel. It's a cover designed by Itu Chowdhury, and this font that he's invented, Itu is a great graphic designer, is called Bong Deco, which is Art Deco plus, with Bengali, with reference to Bengali script. Um, the UK version has a different cover, which is called Cal Deco, which again has got elements of Bangla thing in it, Bangla
Yeah,
script, but it's a different kind of a font, and again these things. And Itu had done a fantastic cover for my first novel, but this is the new cover, which is the HarperCollins have brought out very. I'm very happy to say they brought out a matching cover to go with
oh, right.
Great Eastern Hotel.
Interesting. Okay.
Right now, this book, The Great Eastern Hotel, comes out in 2001, and it is a story of a family and a story of Indian history. It starts in 1930 and ends in 2030. So when I published the book, when the book comes out in 2001, 29 years of the history are yet to unfold. Now, 24 of those are gone. So it's interesting to read the book now as opposed to when it came out in 2001, because I was imagining things like India-Pakistan war, like water riots, like religious schism, geopolitics, the politics of the family, all kinds of technology interfering with life and being used by people, all those things. So sci-fi, futuristic, but immediately futuristic. It starts in 2017, no, 2030 is the first prologue
Please,
of the novel.
uh,
And then it goes backwards to 1930 and then comes back and forth. So uh, please feel free to pick it up and browse through it. And I believe it's in the bookshops in Bangalore now. So yes,
oh,
that one's been done. I mean, at least for me, other people might want to do other ones.
yeah. How do we give a closing note? It's very tough.
You do it.
Well, I can just say that I don't know if there was it's an it's an it's an experiential novel. I said it before, I'm repeating myself. It's astounding. It's kind of like, it's like it's very thrilling. I mean, if when you read it, you are in the moment, and it's the ultimate sort of escape from everything that you have in your present space, and you're completely like transported to another point in history. And and it's not just like doesn't always go by the definition of historical fiction. It is historical fiction, right? Would you define it as historical fiction? It
It's
is, right?
historical fiction.
It
Yeah,
is.
definitely.
But there is a certain element of point of view. There's an element of a very contemporary, I don't know, cinematic point perspective, or is the perspective of the way in which the writer comes in, that it also feels very contemporary. I think, if I may explain that, maybe it's the voice, maybe it's the eye, maybe it's the way, it's flowing from one moment to the other. That is, it's very present, it's very here and now, and it sort of like maneuvers everyone into the streets. And of course, like, for anybody who's not been to Calcutta and been to Calcutta, which I'm covering pretty much everyone in the world, they should read the novel because I don't think
Thank
there
you.
is another Calcutta novel. And I know, like, Ruchir, of course, is like Calcutta is his good old
I'd
everyday
just like to
now.
say thank you, Rupleena. Thank you so much for this close reading and the words of praise. I'm very, very pleased and touched that you like the book. I would like to thank the crew at IIHS for having us have this discussion with you. And yeah, just thanks for whoever came. Couldn't really see who the people were attending, but thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both so much. This was really lovely. And I know like lots of people are, if they haven't already read the book, they're dying to read the book. Most of us are in that list also. We will be hosting our next session on the 13th of June, which is we'll be launching Sundar Sarukai's new book, What It Is. And this will be held at the Bangalore Sadashiv Nagar campus. So if you're in the city, please join us. The details will be on our website soon. And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. And I hope you have a good rest of the week.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Ruchir. Thanks,
Thank you.
Rupina.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.